After a bitter divorce, a woman is driven to a deserted road by her own son, who coldly tells her, "This is where you get off." He leaves her with nothing, believing he and his father now control the family home and business. What he doesn't know is that in the final divorce settlement his father signed yesterday, his mother was granted full, secret control of the entire family fortune he thought he was inheriting. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a new story. This one is about the ultimate betrayal. Before we begin, please show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The finality of the divorce papers felt like a physical weight in my hands. 40 years of marriage, a shared life, a family, all of it reduced to a stack of papers signed in a sterile law office. My husband, Robert, had left me for a woman half my age, a cliché so painful it was almost boring. I spent the day after the final signing in a fog, packing a single suitcase with my most essential belongings. The house we had built together, the house that was filled with the ghosts of a happy life, now felt like a mausoleum. Robert and his new partner wanted to move in, and I was given 24 hours to vacate. My son, Michael, was supposed to be my saving grace. He had called that morning, his voice cool but efficient. "I'll pick you up at 3, Mom," he'd said. "I found a place for you to stay until you get on your feet." I had wept with relief. At least I still had my son. He arrived promptly at 3, not even getting out of the car. He just honked the horn. I walked out of my home of 40 years for the last time, dragging my small suitcase behind me. I got into the passenger seat, my heart a leaden lump in my chest. Michael didn't look at me. He just put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small. "A friend of mine has a room for rent," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "It's quiet. You'll like it." The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine. I tried to make small talk, to bridge the strange new distance between us, but his answers were clipped and monosyllabic. I watched as the familiar landscape of our town gave way to the sprawling suburbs, and then to the unfamiliar, winding country roads. The houses grew farther apart, the trees thicker. A knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. "Michael, are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, looking at the dense woods that now lined the road. "I'm sure," he said, his voice flat. We drove for another 20 minutes, deeper and deeper into the remote countryside. There were no houses here, no signs of life, just endless trees and the narrow ribbon of asphalt stretching ahead of us. My unease curdled into a cold, sharp fear. This wasn't right. He slowed the car and pulled over onto a dusty gravel shoulder. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. We were completely alone. "Okay," he said, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were not those of my son. They were the eyes of a stranger, cold and empty. "What is it? What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Nothing's wrong, Mom. We're here." He gestured to the empty, desolate road around us. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process his words. "Here? Michael, there's nothing here." He sighed, a sound of pure, irritated impatience. "That's the point. Look, Dad and I have talked. He's starting his new life. The business, the house, he needs a clean break. And you're a loose end, a complication." The words hit me, each one a physical blow. A loose end. "So," he said, his voice as cold and final as a judge's gavel, "this is where you get off." I just stared at him, speechless with a horror so profound it had no name. "Get out of the car, Mom." I didn't move. He reached over, opened my passenger door, and then got out himself. He walked around to my side, grabbed my arm, and pulled me from the seat. He took my suitcase from the back and set it in the dust beside me. He got back into the car without another word, started the engine, and drove away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust on a deserted road, utterly and completely alone. I've only just begun this story, but believe me, it's about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the hero faces an even greater injustice. The dust settled, leaving me in a silence so profound it rang in my ears. I stood on the gravel shoulder, my small suitcase beside me, and watched the empty road where my son's car had disappeared. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what had happened. It was a mistake, a prank, a horrible, cruel joke, and any second now he would turn around, laughing, and tell me to get back in the car. But the road remained empty. The sun beat down. The only sound was the buzzing of insects in the tall grass. He was gone. He had actually done it. He had left me here to rot. The shock finally gave way to a cold, primal fear that left me breathless. I was 66 years old, alone with no phone, no money, and no idea where I was. I did the only thing I could do. I picked up my suitcase and started to walk. With every step on the hot, unforgiving asphalt, the fear began to burn away, replaced by something else, an anger. A rage so pure and white-hot, it felt like it could melt steel. He had called me a loose end, a complication. He and his father, my ex-husband Robert, had decided I was disposable. They had orchestrated this, I was sure of it. Robert, with his new young wife, wanted the house, the business, the life we had built, all to himself. And my son, my weak, greedy son, had been his willing accomplice. They thought they had taken everything from me. They thought they had won. As I walked, the image of the final divorce meeting with our lawyers flashed in my mind. I remembered the smug, triumphant look on Robert's face as he signed the papers, so sure he was leaving me with nothing but a paltry alimony check. But then I remembered the look on his lawyer's face when my own lawyer, Mr. Chen, presented the final, unassailable document, the original Articles of Incorporation for our company, Vance Miller Properties. The company my father had started, which I had inherited, and which I had foolishly put Robert's name on as a gesture of partnership when we married. What Robert had forgotten, and what his lawyer had clearly missed, was the clause my own father had insisted on 40 years ago. In the event of a divorce, all controlling interest and all primary assets of the corporation revert fully and irrevocably to the sole heir of the original founder, to me. The house, the stock portfolio, the business itself, legally, it was all mine. Robert hadn't just divorced me, he had, in the eyes of the law, divorced himself from his own fortune. That knowledge was a shield against the fear. It was a suit of armor. They thought they had left me powerless. They had no idea that I held all the power. They were celebrating their victory in a house I owned, running a business I controlled, spending money that was legally mine. My son had just abandoned the queen of the entire kingdom on a deserted road, all for the promise of a prince's title that was no longer his to inherit. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. I was no longer a victim shivering on the roadside. I was a monarch in exile planning the reclamation of my throne. After walking for what felt like an eternity, I heard the rumble of an approaching truck. A large 18-wheeler slowed as it neared me, and a grizzled, kind-faced driver leaned out the window. "Ma'am, you all right? Your car break down?" I gave him a weary but grateful smile. "Something like that," I said. He helped me into the cab, and for the next hour, I listened to him talk about his own kids as he drove me to the nearest small town. He bought me a cup of coffee and a sandwich at a roadside diner and refused to take any money for it. The kindness of this complete stranger was a stark and painful contrast to the cruelty of my own son. At the diner, I asked to use their phone. I dialed Mr. Chen's number from memory. "Clara," he exclaimed, his voice full of relief. "I've been trying to reach you. Michael called me this morning, asking for the keys to the main office. He said you had a family emergency and had to leave town. I took a slow sip of the diner's hot, black coffee. There is no family emergency, David, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. But there is a corporate one. I need you to begin the process of liquidating all assets of Vance Miller Properties immediately. And one more thing. Please report the primary car, a black sedan, as stolen. My son appears to have absconded with it. Mr. Chen worked with an efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful to behold. He arranged for a car to pick me up from the small town and take me to a comfortable, discreet hotel in the city, instructing me not to answer my phone or speak to anyone until he had everything in place. For 2 days, I lived in a state of suspended animation, a queen in a borrowed castle, waiting for the news from the front lines of the war I had just declared. The first report came on Tuesday afternoon. The liquidation of the corporate accounts is complete, Mr. Chen told me over the phone, his voice crisp. All assets have been transferred to a new holding company under your sole control. As of 11 a.m. this morning, your ex-husband's and your son's corporate credit cards were declined. I pictured Robert at some fancy restaurant with his new girlfriend, his face turning from smug to purple with rage as the waiter politely informed him his card was no good. The image brought me a grim, cold satisfaction. The second report was even more satisfying. The matter of the stolen vehicle has been resolved, Mr. Chen said. A state trooper pulled Michael over for speeding on the interstate this afternoon. When he ran the plates, the car came up as reported stolen. Michael was, I am told, quite indignant. I could just imagine it. My son in his expensive suit, looking down his nose at a state trooper, completely unaware that his world was imploding. He was detained for 2 hours at the local barracks until I could clarify the situation, Mr. Chen continued. I informed the authorities that the corporation, aka you, would not be pressing charges at this time, provided the vehicle was returned to your possession immediately. It is being towed to a secure garage as we speak. Michael was released without charge, but I believe he had to call his father for a ride. The main event, the frantic phone call from my son, came to Mr. Chen's office an hour after Michael's release from police custody. My lawyer recounted the conversation to me with the detached amusement of a biologist observing a frantic specimen under a microscope. Michael, he said, was practically screaming into the phone. "What is going on? I was just arrested. The company cards don't work. What did she do? Let me talk to my mother." Mr. Chen, in his calm, imperturbable voice, had informed my son that I was unavailable. "I am handling all of Mrs. Miller's affairs from now on, Michael," he had said, "and as her legal counsel, I can confirm that your access to all corporate funds has been terminated." "Terminated?" Michael had apparently shrieked. "That's our money. My father and I run that business." "I'm afraid you are mistaken," Mr. Chen had coolly replied. "Your father's position on the board was a courtesy extended to him by your mother during their marriage. As per the original articles of incorporation, which we reviewed in detail during the divorce proceedings your father initiated, all controlling interest in Vance Miller Properties reverted to your mother upon the dissolution of their marriage. She is the sole owner. You and your father are, I'm afraid, merely former employees." The silence on Michael's end of the line, Mr. Chen told me, was profound. He had delivered the killing blow, the one that shattered every last bit of my son's arrogant self-delusion. The business he thought he would inherit, the power he thought he held, it was all an illusion. It had always been my power, my business, my money. He had just never been forced to see it before. But my lawyer had saved the very best for last. Just before Michael could find his voice again, Mr. Chen delivered the final, devastating piece of news. "Michael," he had said, his voice a model of professional sympathy, "there is one last piece of housekeeping. The property at 125 Elm Street is, as you know, a corporate asset. As part of the liquidation your mother has ordered, it will need to be vacated." He let that sink in. A formal notice will be delivered to you and your father tomorrow, giving you 30 days to remove all personal belongings. The house will be listed for sale next Monday. The house, the one he had just kicked me out of, the one he had chosen over his own mother. It was gone. Everything was gone. And it was all because he had made the fatal mistake of telling me where to get off. But my lawyer had saved the very best for last. Just before Michael could find his voice again, Mr. Chen delivered the final, devastating piece of news. "Michael," he had said, his voice a model of professional sympathy, "there is one last piece of housekeeping. The property at 125 Elm Street is, as you know, a corporate asset. As part of the liquidation your mother has ordered, it will need to be vacated." He let that sink in. "A formal notice will be delivered to you and your father tomorrow, giving you 30 days to remove all personal belongings. The house will be listed for sale next Monday." The house, the one he had just kicked me out of, the one he had chosen over his own mother. It was gone. Everything was gone. And it was all because he had made the fatal mistake of telling me where to get off. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal activity. From the comfort of my hotel suite, which Mr. Chen had insisted on arranging, I became the remote commander of a swift and total corporate dismantlement. I signed papers, I approved motions, I listened to my lawyer's daily updates with a calm, detached focus. He told me Robert, my ex-husband, had tried to challenge my authority, only to be presented with the ironclad legal documents that proved his position was, and always had been, entirely dependent on my goodwill. He told me the company accounts were now fully secured, and the liquidation of all physical assets was underway. The empire I had built with my father and then shared with my husband was being methodically taken apart piece by my own command. I felt no joy on this, only the grim satisfaction of a surgeon cutting away a deep and pervasive sickness. After a week of frantic, unanswered calls to me, Michael finally understood the new chain of command. He started calling Mr. Chen's office multiple times a day. At first, his tone was indignant and demanding. Then, as the reality of his situation set in, it became desperate and pleading. He begged for a meeting. He said he would do anything, say anything, just to have 5 minutes of my time. For another week, I refused. I needed him to understand that access to me was no longer his right. It was a privilege, and one he had spectacularly forfeited. Finally, when Mr. Chen informed me that my son sounded like a genuinely broken man, I relented. I agreed to meet him. Not at my hotel, and not at his, or rather my, house. I would meet him on neutral ground. The same sterile conference room at the law firm where so many families came to be formally broken. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the long, polished table, looking small and lost. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, no longer the confident, cruel man who had left me on the road, but a hollowed-out shell of a person. He stood when I entered the room, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Mr. Chen gave me a brief nod and then discreetly left us alone, closing the heavy door behind him. The silence was thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. He was the one to break it, his voice raspy. "Mom," he began, unable to meet my eyes, "there are no words to fix what I did. There are no excuses." I listened to him, to Dad. He told me you had cleaned him out in the divorce, that you had hidden assets, that you were trying to ruin him. He said the business and the house were rightfully ours, and we had to get you out of the picture before you destroyed everything. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with tears. And I believed him, or I chose to believe him, because I was weak and greedy, and he promised me everything. He took a shaky breath. "Leaving you on that road, it was the most monstrous thing I have ever done. It wasn't just a mistake. It was evil. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I deserve this. I deserve to have nothing. I I needed to tell you that I know. I know what I am." His confession was absolute. There were no justifications, no attempts to shift the blame. It was the raw, ugly truth of his own character laid bare on the conference room table. I listened to the silence for a long time after he finished speaking. I looked at this man, my son, and saw the scared little boy he had always been, a boy who had been so easily manipulated by a charismatic, narcissistic father. My anger, which had been a burning fire, had cooled, leaving only the embers of a deep, profound sorrow. "I believe you are sorry, Michael," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "and I forgive you." He let out a sob of what sounded like pure, unadulterated relief. "But," I continued, and his head snapped up, "forgiveness does not erase the consequences. It does not magically repair the trust you have obliterated. I forgive you because you are my son, and my heart forces me to. But I will never forget what you were willing to do." I slid a document across the table, one Mr. Chen had prepared for me that morning. "The house is being sold. The business is gone. Your father will receive a small portion of the initial investment he made 40 years ago, as required by law, and nothing more." I pushed the document closer to Michael. "This is for you. I have established a small trust fund. It is not a fortune. It is not an inheritance. It is a second chance. There is enough in there for you to get a small apartment and to pay for tuition at a trade school or a community college. It is enough for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, without his influence and without my wealth. It is a hand up, Michael, not a handout." He stared at the paper, his face a mixture of shock and dawning gratitude. He had expected nothing, and I had given him a chance. A hard, difficult chance, but a chance nonetheless. That was the only way forward for us. We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. The 2 years that followed were a quiet and steady reconstruction. The house at 125 Elm Street, my home for 4 decades, was sold to a lovely young family within a month. The assets of Vance Miller Properties were liquidated, with the vast majority of the fortune secured in my new holding company. As for my ex-husband, Robert, he received his legally mandated settlement, a sum that seemed laughably small compared to the life he thought he was going to lead. His new young wife, who had been attracted to the allure of a wealthy and powerful man, promptly left him when she realized the wealth and power were no longer his. Last I heard, he was living in a small condo in Florida, a bitter old man who had outsmarted himself right out of a fortune. My son Michael took the lifeline I offered him. With the money from the small trust, he enrolled in a 2-year program for architectural drafting. He moved into a small, simple apartment on the other side of town. I watched him from a careful distance, our relationship slowly, tentatively beginning to regrow. There were no more expectations of lavish dinners or easy money. Instead, we had coffee once a week at a simple diner. He would tell me about his classes, the challenge of learning a new skill, the quiet pride he took in his work. He was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady humility. For the first time, he was building something that was truly his own, and it was changing him from the inside out. The first time I visited his apartment, I almost cried. It was tiny, with secondhand furniture and a kitchen smaller than my pantry, but it was immaculate. And on his bookshelf, next to his drafting textbooks, was a single framed photo, one of him and me, taken years ago on a family vacation. Seeing it there told me more than any apology could. It told me that he was trying not just to build a new career, but to rebuild his own character, with the memory of his mother at its center. On the day he graduated from his program, I took him out to dinner at a nice but not extravagant restaurant. He had already found a job with a small architectural firm, starting at the bottom, and he was filled with a quiet, authentic pride I had never seen in him before. He looked at me across the table, his eyes clear and direct. "You know," he said, "when Dad and I planned what we planned, we thought you were the obstacle. The weak link we had to remove to get what we wanted. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. We were so wrong. You weren't the obstacle, Mom. You were the only thing holding it all together. Losing everything, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the first time in my entire life I feel like I've actually earned anything. The respect of my boss, the small paycheck I get every 2 weeks, this meal, which I am paying for tonight. He reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't just give me a second chance at a career, Mom. You gave me a second chance at being a man my father would have actually been proud of. Thank you. I squeezed his hand, the tears I had held back for 2 years finally falling freely. They were not tears of pain, but of profound, overwhelming relief. The road had been long and impossibly painful. I had lost my husband, my home, and for a time, my son. But as I sat there, looking at the humbled, hard-working, and finally honorable man across from me, I knew I hadn't lost a thing. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my legacy. And I had gotten my son back, not the weak boy who had abandoned me, but the strong man he was always meant to be. Our family was smaller now and quieter, but it was built on a foundation of truth, and that was a foundation that could never be broken again.